I have to ask you that about investigative reporting, because it's also shining a bright light in the corners of other corridors of power, and Hollywood has come under that scrutiny. You've seen some real giants of your industry, Harvey Weinstein, Kevin Spacey, and others, who have been, I guess exposed is the wrong word, but who have been identified as sexual harassers, sexual abusers, or at least there are allegations of that.
They call them
allegations, predators,
yeah.
predators. How pervasive is that in the industry itself, and how complicit is everyone who has been around it all these years and not said anything about it?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, anybody who had like very specific knowledge of what was going on, they'll have to answer questions about, how complicit were they.
I mean, you saw a lot of stars, people who you've acted with.
Rightly so.
But they came forward after these very brave women who were not prominent and who were not powerful told their stories to the New York Times, told them to Ronan Farrow in the New Yorker.
Yeah. I think there's a number of reasons people go into this line of work that I'm in, essentially trying to come up with stories that people will pay to see. One is because it's just ridiculous amounts of fun. Two is, if you can make it stick, it can be a pretty good living, and you get to travel the world and see interesting things. Some people do it for power. They just want to have a degree of power because that's the thing that gives them credence. It's something, on one hand, it's a parking space with your name on it, and you take it to another extreme, it's the ability to beat up on underlings and say things like, so you want a job? You want to keep your job? Well, then you're going to have to fulfill these other demands I have on you that are of a sexual nature. That is pure harassment. It's to the degree of assault. There are people like that, without a doubt, in Hollywood. I don't think it is as it's not common core, but without a doubt, it's widespread. Because human nature comes down to, a lot of times those people in power have it for that ability, that access, in order to be a sexual predator.
Well, we've seen it in politics.
Well, it's everywhere.
Seen it in business.
But part of it also goes like, look, we all, in a lot of ways, we all left town and joined the circus, and the circus is glamorous in a lot of ways, and there is camaraderie, and there is sex, and there's attraction, and there's boyfriends and girlfriends, and there's flirting, and that's always been part of it. There's on-set affairs. There's no law against that.
But this goes far beyond
This goes much farther beyond that, because it ends up being a swaying of influence, and it becomes part of the marketplace. It becomes, when it is inherent into the workforce that you join, that you have to succumb to a degree of sexual harassment in order to keep your job. When that happens, the only thing you can say is, number one, I hope the victims come out and tell all sorts of stories, everything, tell the truth about what goes on, and that the repercussions land exactly as they should.
First of all, were you surprised by some of these revelations?
I'm surprised by the overtness of it. Yeah, sure. Yes, absolutely. Am I surprised at some of the personalities involved? Not Harvey. He had a way of doing business and a zero-sum game, negotiation stuff that would not make you surprised to have him be one of those kind of guys that does that in the workplace. Others are just like, well, there's a time and place for decorum and ethics, and you blew it. There's that as well.
Do you think that there'll be scripts written about this, about these women who lived in terror, or will Hollywood protect itself from that?
Oh no, I think there's going to be quite a bit that's going to come out about it. And here's what's going to be an interesting test: is that going to be salacious, titillating, shocking, outrageous in order to draw viewers? Or is it going to be human and realistic and authentic in its details in order to say what happened? In some ways, you can already see you know, I'm sure there's already stories in development that are going to be based on the Harvey Weinstein or whatever. And is that going to be as, what's the word I'm looking for? Is that going to be as pure an examination of the theme as somebody else taking along and saying, well, let's fictionalize it and turn it into something so that we're not necessarily dealing with the specifics of any one person, but can get down to the specifics of what it really did to the human beings involved.
Do you think films like that, or let's talk about Philadelphia, which was a brave film in 1993, do you think they have the power to change things? Do you think Philadelphia hastened an understanding of age?
I think it did, both in what it accomplished and what it failed to accomplish. The throwing deep in the end zone on Philadelphia was that it was going to compete in the open marketplace. You could make a small movie for $400,000 and you could play in every film festival in the world, and only 62,000 people will see it. It will be a profoundly good movie to them. But when you're going out and you're going to compete in your local marketplace for a broad audience to come in and deal with something that is kind of ripped right out of today's headlines, you have to do it in a manner that it's going to be somehow so approachable, authentic, and glamorous in order to attract an audience who simply wants to be entertained. If they become enlightened at the same time, good for you. But there's, throughout all of American history, and which I have said, a gentleman's agreement with Gregory Peck in 1952 was about anti-Semitism that no one had ever touched before. The Best Years of Our Lives was about the emptiness that an entire generation faced when they came back from the war, and how in the world do they get on with that? You can go, The Grapes of Wrath, I mean, even though the ending was absolutely nothing like John Steinbeck wrote, it ended up being entering into the national consciousness and changing that consciousness, because you could not argue with the theme that it was examining. And Hollywood will do that all the time. It won't always land on it. It won't always make it happen. It might cop out periodically, but there's always going to be something coming down the pike that is meant to do it. The difference now is it might be on, you know, you might be on a streaming service as opposed to playing in your local cinema, because the superheroes are filling up all the cinemas.